Today, I want to welcome David Solomon. He is the founder of SERO Growth. He helps manufacturers expand into untapped international markets and supports international organizations entering the North American markets. He brings nearly 35 years of experience and has led and executed international market expansion initiatives across manufacturing, advertising, and technology services. I'm excited to talk about this because one of my passions is I would love to see manufacturing become bigger in the US. I don't want to say return, but maybe some of what we've lost return. And David's one of those folks that studies this regularly. David, welcome.
Thank you, Craig. Good to be here.
So let's give some context. We met in Success Champions Networking,
Hmm.
and which is neat. I've had a number of guests from that come on. So, hey, folks out there trying to get on the podcast, join SCN. It's a good it's a good way to get in on the podcast. But you and I we've talked what 3-4 times.
Yep.
It's just been it's been delightful. You said something in the green room that really stood out, and let me kind of set the stage for that from one of my experiences when not long after I moved to Austin. I moved here and I inherited a product that had a screwed up cost model.
Hmm.
And it was actually a commodity. It was a semiconductor for mobile phones, which enormous cost pressure on those. And they would tell me every month in the monthly reviews, you need to improve the margins. I said, well, we have to take cost out. And they said, they can't be done. You need to raise prices. I'm like, yeah, this ain't the market where you raise prices.
Yeah.
And finally, I was like, look, you guys can either beat me up over the margins. You're welcome to do that, but you can't tie my hands and not let me work on the price. And so finally, I got permission to release our assembly spec to somebody I'd worked with previously in Colorado, who we had a ceramic substrate and it was a little bit of specialized handling. And these guys quoted it assembly for half of what we were paying in Asia.
Hmm.
And that got their attention. And they said, okay, go down the basement where we keep the numbers guys, have them run it through the cost models. And I go down there and they tell me, they say, oh, we need to raise your tax rate to 35%. I'm like, what? They said, you're being taxed in Singapore for this product, which is 5%. But since it's coming to the US for assembly, we have to tax it at 35%. I'm like, this product will never be sold in the US. It only works in frequency bands that are in Europe and Asia. They're like, that's the way it was. And that always, to this day, that breaks my heart because I looked at that, I was like, we just made it harder for American manufacturers. We just took away American jobs. I was about to, you know, give them business. And it just, for me, it kind of busted the myth that you can't manufacture effectively in the US.
Craig, that's a story I heard. So I was in the toy business in the 1990s. 840,000 square feet in Canada, in Montreal, another 100,000 square feet just on the other side of the US border in a little town called Plattsburgh, New York. For those of you who don't know, that was an old US Air Force base, border community, great place. And we had 30 injection molding machines, large printing press. We manufactured 70% of our own components. We assembled on a just-in-time basis. We were highly profitable. $100 million company, highly profitable. We busted the myth in the 90s that you can compete with China. You can compete with other markets. You just have to be smart about it. A little more automation. This is in the 90s, right? So we're not talking about robots. A little more automation, a little more savoir-faire. But the beauty was we didn't have to buy container loads to bring to Canada to store it, warehouse it, unpack it, reship it. That all those costs that people don't factor in because we built everything just in time.
Yeah.
And whatever went to the US, we assembled on the US side of the border and we shipped it to our American clients. Everybody was super happy. We were competing with China.
Wow.
When we were bought out in the late 90s, new administration walks in and says, this is dumb. We're going to do this all in China. Finished product brought in from China. We were bankrupt in a few months. They didn't understand they looked at the unit cost at production, but they didn't follow the rest of the chain. okay, what happens when and what do we have to do and this, that, the handling, the this, the that. We lost money. We had to liquidate goods. We had to, it was just how could you forecast? Right. So
Right.
what the beauty of made in the USA today, if we go back to that, is that yeah, your unit cost might be slightly higher than what you manufacture, let's say in China or India or wherever it is that you're going to manufacture, but you're missing the rest of the chain of handling it when it comes in, repackaging it, re this, re that, and now you have to commit, pardon me, a lot of cash to bring in those containers. Look at the stress you put on the business versus manufacture in-house, assemble when needed, ship when needed. When you take all that into consideration, we compete very well on a global scale, and Craig. And I think we've lost that because we are not calculating the entirety of the supply chain and then of the sale. That's my belief, and I haven't had many people who've been able to contradict my theory.
Well, going back to my assembly, years later, I ran into the sales guy at that account and I said, all right, you can tell me now, were you guys buying the business? He said, no, we hit all of our margin goals. They hit all their margin goals and came in with a quote that was half what we were paying in Asia.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing is the number I've always heard is if you see a change in demand, you put in your order, it's 3 months from China to the US. That's a whole calendar quarter.
And what happens if, as we've seen now, there's a disruption?
Yeah.
You're still committed. It's goods on the water. If it makes it here, now what are you going to do with it? What happens when the client cancels the order or postpones the order because of a disruption?
Yeah.
When you make in US, you control better your inventory and your supply chain. You control better all of that. That is a major advantage.
I didn't think about that. When you just said that, it hit me. I was like, if I'm selling to Europe and I'm manufacturing in China, I'm probably going through the Straits of Hormuz, right? Or not Straits of Hormuz, but
Not the Strait of Hormuz.
Red Sea,
Red Sea, yeah. Yeah.
which
Listen,
that
if we're looking at geopolitics the way it is today and the volatility out there, you run the risk. But it's Craig, it's not just now with the war. Since 2008, look how many disruptions we've had, whether it's economic or whether it's COVID or whether it's something else. You basically you give the control of your manufacturing process to somebody else, and you're at their mercy, good
yeah.
and bad. If you're controlling it, and there's so much more you could do with it. You know what? I think that well, if you're a commodity product, I understand the price war. But most American manufacturing is not commodity. There's an advantage. There's something positive in there, something unique in there that you would want, and you're willing to pay a slight premium or a premium for that. That is definitely worth made in USA. And I'm a Canadian, and I'm
Yeah.
saying I would say the same thing to Canadian manufacturers.
Yeah, and I think as long as you have quality, I mean that helps improve. It's like back in the 19, late 80s, early 90s, you buy a Japanese car because of its quality. If you have a reputation for quality and if you can build that into your manufacturing in the US and the US can make sure, and I think we're doing a lot better on the quality front than we used to, not that there's not room for improvements, but that people will pay. I mean, as a matter of fact, that hit me. There's a presentation I give, and in one part of the presentation, it's about how people try to fix sales problems with price. And which shortcut, don't try to fix a sales problem with price. It doesn't work. That's not the solution. it's, that's kind of the point of the presentation. But I go through and I cite multiple sources that ask people what their primary consideration was. And it doesn't matter if it's B2B or if it's B2C, price is not the first consideration.
I have told that. So in my role, when I work with manufacturers and they have never exported, that's the first conversation we have. What makes you unique? Why do your clients buy from you currently? And if you tell me it's price and you're not supposed to be a commodity, then you don't have the right answer. And I make them go back to their clients and say, so why are you buying from us? And it sounds stupid, but I've actually said the business owner, not the head of sales, the business owner, go talk to your clients, your best 10 clients. I'll go with you if you want. And I'll ask the question as your consultant, but I want to know why they're buying you. What problem have you solved for them? And it more than likely, it's not a price answer. And that, when you go to export, is what you take. That's the message. Because today, unit cost, whatever, you're gonna struggle on a price list between you, India, China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Malaysia, whatever they're manufacturing. But if you're saying, first thing, this is what makes us great. This is why our clients in X market buys us. Here's why you should be buying from us. Then price becomes secondary or tertiary. And
Yeah.
now you have an advantage. But if you only come in with price, you lose. You're going to lose.
And I just think there's this broad perspective. There's this belief, at least in the United States, that we can't afford to manufacture. We can't be competitive in manufacturing. What do you think drives that belief?
Well, there's a perception of our labor costs being too high. Look, what we're seeing right now, forcibly in, if I'm not mistaken, it's Los Angeles. I believe now they're pushing hotels with $30 an hour minimum wage. When you create that kind of, environment where you're forcing higher minimum wage prices, your perception is we can't compete with Mexico, we cannot compete with China because look at their labor costs. It's negligible. What we're failing to recognize in North America is today, yes, it's a capital expenditure. It's a significant investment in equipment, but then you could create the product that you want. With automation now today, you can actually compete at the end of the day. But companies don't want to invest in capital expenditures. They don't want to invest in more people for quality control. They don't want to invest in that. They want to let someone else do that. That means you have given up your manufacturing capacity and quality and control. When we did it in the 90s, people were marveled. And I said, oh, I couldn't buy 30 injection molding machines. Listen, we didn't buy brand new machines, Greg. We bought them in auctions. We were creative in the way we purchased things. But the investment in the long run paid off supremely well. We were
Yeah.
able to sell product at a higher margin. We were able to customize our products. We did private labeling for Target at the time. We did all kinds of things. And they said, you Canadians, how do you compete with China? It's because we have the equipment, we have the people, we have the talent. We brought it all under one roof. Same thing can happen today in the US. Find your niche.
So just a little thing I'm curious about is injection molding. So in the 90s, I was designing cell phones for Ericsson.
Yeah, nice.
And a tool, an injection mold, a tool for our plastics would cost us 200 grand. And those days, on a typical product, we were shipping 200,000 phones. So it's like $1 per phone just going to the tool.
Right,
And the thing that got me was how that just seemed really, really prohibitive. I mean, that was high volume in those days.
right.
That would just seem prohibitive. How did you guys do toys? If I'm sitting there thinking, $1 per product just for the tool, how'd you guys keep the price down with toys?
You know what? I'll tell you what it was is again, it's back to smart manufacturing. It wasn't about we built it when we needed it. We didn't build it, we didn't have to do 200,000 a day. In some cases we used to have these plastic cases and we had our forecasts and we had our budgets and whatever, and we knew what we had to do. And you know what? We went under a buck. I got to tell you, if I remember correctly, our costs for so many things was negligible. Look, we sold, Craig, I can tell you, I sold these plastic case games with with great items inside of it. They retailed for 9.99. I got to tell you something. We made nice margins, and so did the retailers. Back in the
Yeah.
day, in our case, they needed 40% gross margins in an industry that was getting 20 from the Mattels, the Fisher Prices, and the Hasbros in those days. We were giving them 40 to 45%, and we were making money.
Yeah.
So it was really we figured out we produced in dead times because look, in the toy industry, you're shipping 70% of your goods between August and November,
Hmm.
right? So you have to manage cash flow, but you're also manufacturing in dead time. So you warehouse it, and we were just able, our guys were really good at costing and really good at putting componentry together, and really we competed incredibly well.
Yeah.
But that was part of the people. What people freaked out was like, but you spend so much money on your machines and your molds and your quality control, and look how many we have to have 1,200 employees to assemble and everything, and yet our unit costs we were kicking ass.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's a real life example. I mean, as you pointed out, it's we're coming into this with assumptions and we've kind of raised the white flag saying we just can't compete when we can.
But you know, Craig, this is the thing which we do is where are we getting this opinion from? Media, our gut, a friend. We didn't do the homework. We didn't research to see what can the market bear. What do we need to do to compete? We just assumed we're out. It's cheaper in China. It's cheaper in Bangladesh. It could be, but it could also be more costly. You're not factoring in holidays there. You're not factoring the freight costs to bring it in. You're not factoring in what if you can only bring a 20-foot container, not a 40-foot container? It's not the same cost anymore. You're not factoring in all these things. You're just looking at, I don't have to invest in here, therefore it has to be cheaper there.
Yeah.
No, not necessarily.
Now, here's something else, and this is just pure curiosity. Every now and then I see these videos of the containers falling off the ship and floating around the ocean. How often does that happen? What does that do to a supply chain?
Look, if I don't, I couldn't tell you how often that happens, and I think that what we see on social and we see in the news is almost always exaggerated, but it does happen. Damage is going to happen. Sometimes the containers aren't closed properly, and the salt of the sea or the heat gets in, or the cold, and it ruins the content. You run that risk. Is it every container? No. There's another risk you didn't even talk about is what if there's a strike at the port like we had a few years ago and you couldn't release the container with the goods, right? What does that do to your business model? And so these are the kinds of conversations that you don't have in you wouldn't have these conversations if you manufactured in the United States or in Canada. And that to me is, this is the advantage that you could share with your clients is you never have to worry about supply chain because we are covered. We will have the merch. You don't have to worry about, oh, what if China, or what if this, or what if that. I know a lot of people who were very frustrated in the last few years post-COVID, all these transport problems, all these logistics problems just to get the goods to their warehouse.
Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about getting into new markets because that's kind of what you do. You help people do that.
Yep.
One of the things that you said that really surprised me is if I have a good that I want to ship into Canada, it doesn't matter if I'm only shipping, my only market is Alberta.
Hmm.
I have to have French on it.
Well, so by law, if you're going to go to retail, then by law, your packaging has to be bilingual. This is a law that's been in effect for probably close to about 50 years. It was actually a very smart protectionist move by the government of Canada so that we'd have to actually assemble or repackage or something here in Canada in a bilingual sense. Look, 20%, 25% of our population are French Canadian, so you do want to be able to cater to that market. But if you're selling B2B, no, you don't need it to be bilingual
Oh, okay.
unless you're shipping it to Quebec. Because if you're shipping it to Quebec and there's an instruction, or if there's a something that needs to be repurposed, reinterpreted, or whatever, you would be shipping just the same way you ship to France in French. You should ship it to Quebec with things done in French. But if you're shipping componentry or stuff to be assembled, no, it doesn't have to be bilingual. But if it goes to retail, in theory, it has to be bilingual, but if you do ship it to a national chain, they will demand it bilingually.
Huh. What are some other considerations for American manufacturers that want to ship into Canada?
Well, first of all, the size of our country. Like we're the second largest country in the world, but we only have 7 cities. So when
Yeah.
you're considering Canada, where are you going? Especially if you're shipping for if you're exporting for the first time and you've never exported, the distance from wherever, like you're in Texas, right? So for
Yeah.
you to go to Montreal or go to Vancouver might be the same. But if I'm in the state of New York and I want to ship, shipping to Montreal versus shipping to Vancouver is a whole other animal. And
Yeah.
so you got to look at, like, we are not as populous as the US. We're not it has many cities in the US, but man, we're such a large country. And yeah, we have different laws. We have different, environmental laws, packaging laws. We have an anti-plastic law, for example, in Canada. So if you're a single-use plastics company, you're not going to do so well in Canada right now. So when I tell people is when you're going to look at exporting, know the laws at the federal level and also at the provincial level. Just like in the US, you want to know federal law, you need to know state law. But don't assume because it works like that in your state, that's how it's going to be in every province in Canada.
Yeah.
And by the way, that works globally. It's not just, like I help a lot of companies, not just in North America. I have companies around the world that I help them bring them to other markets. We have the same conversations. Where do you want to go? What are the external factors? Be very careful of the external factors because that is something that is non-negotiable. You can negotiate a lot of things, but you can't negotiate laws and you can't negotiate, environmental concerns and you can't negotiate legal concerns. So make sure you know all that before you go into a market. Don't assume anything. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about of assumptions, see the Target case when Target came to Canada and how they blew their brains out here, people. They lost, I think it was like $3.5 billion lost
Oh,
in their move to Canada. Oh, yeah.
wow.
Yeah. It was a massive failure in here because they
Did
just
they end up
assumed the
retreating or
market.
did they fix their ways and go back in?
No, they withdrew and they never came back.
Wow. Wow. How much, just out of curiosity, I mean, how much would it have cost once they're 3.5 billion in the hole? How much would it cost to actually?
Well, look, they had bought a chain, a former retail chain here called Zellers, about 300 stores. They revamped most of them to make it look like a Target. And everything was fine, except they didn't price it like Target does in the US. They changed that. Canadians just went, you're not who you say you are. You
Right.
look like Target, you smell like Target, but you don't have prices like Target. You don't have the merchandise like, Target. Shelves were empty, problems, logistic problems, whatever. And they literally filed for bankruptcy and pulled out of Canada.
Wow. One of these days I want to have a business where I can lose 3.5 billion and
Well, you see, but that's the thing. So a large corporations, look, Dunkin' Donuts was in Canada, they're gone. You have a lot of other Americans retailers who came to Canada and they're gone. And when you're large and you can throw away that kind of money, that's wonderful. When you're an SME, a small to mid-sized manufacturer company or whatever it is, you don't have that. That could destroy your whole business model, which
yeah.
is why going into a new market based on gut feel, not about researching, not about really doing the right analysis, not really understanding market trends, which is what Target failed at. They did a lot of homework, but they misread the buying patterns of people in Canada. Totally misread it. You can't afford it as an SME to make that mistake. That doesn't mean you shouldn't export. It just means double down on understanding the market, the culture, the nuances before you go into that market. That to me is one of the biggest lessons that I share with all my clients.
So my wife and I, we live in Texas. We have grandkids in College Station. There's a bunch of small towns. Or if we going up to the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, we go through a bunch of small towns. And I explain it to my wife this way. I said, imagine you lived in this little town and you have a certain amount of money. And let's say I go to the baker and I buy something from the baker. He gets some money, but there's loss. There's transaction loss, materials loss, and what have you. And then that baker goes to the dry cleaner and gets some dry cleaning, and there's more loss. There's eventually you're going to go broke if you never have outside money coming into that town. And I would say the same thing about the United States. We've had this trade deficit for years. And it worries me because, now we have bigger levers that we can turn that that soften that. But fundamentally, I feel like in any economic system, you need to be focused on bringing dollars, bringing money from outside your community into your community if you want to prosper.
I think that's very, very accurate. And I don't, I mean, recycling the money inside your market, you're right. Eventually, listen, you're buying goods, and chances are you're buying goods from outside your
Yeah.
city, town, province, state, whatever it is. And you're right, that money will disappear from that economy. So if you don't have external money coming in, you're just going to keep losing, and eventually you'll get down to zero. We're saying the same thing. Look, Canadians and Americans have a lot of beautiful things to offer. I joke around, Canada doesn't just only offer maple syrup and hockey sticks to the rest of the world. We do have other things that we can provide. The US has kind of gotten away from that. We're a service market, we're an intellectual market. Great, wonderful, but you have a talented manufacturing market, you have a talented producing market. You've got a phenomenal farming industry. Make it attractive for people to buy from you. Now, again, attractive doesn't mean price. Give them what they can't get from somebody else. And I think that US know-how, if it was focused on that, would work. Stop copying. Look, the auto industry, you lost your strength in the world because you didn't innovate. You let the Japanese and the Koreans take that dominance away from you.
Yeah.
Now, why would I want to buy an American car other than made in the USA? But look what's happening. Honda makes in the US. Kia makes in the US. Hyundai makes in the US. Uh, German cars are being made in the US because they want the US market. So why did they figure it out and not Americans? So I think we just gave up too fast,
Yeah.
thinking we don't need this anymore.
Well, BMW has a huge factory in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Huge factory.
Yeah. Look, it's not just Ohio and Michigan that, the Rust Belt, if you will, it's all over the country. But that's just the auto industry. Other industries you can be dominant in, but when you take that and you bring it overseas, you're sending your intellectual property to somebody else. You're sending your know-how to somebody else, and they're going to get better. And what are you doing? So I think that what's happening today, if to try to bring back to America the manufacturing, and I'm not going to get into the politics behind it, Craig. This is not a political channel. If you want to talk to me politics, come to see me offline. Um, but I think wakey, wakey people, because you've let too much leave the US
Yeah.
and you're no longer the dominant force in that area. Sorry, yes, it can be made cheaper somewhere else, but cheaper doesn't mean better.
Well, one of the examples I like to point to, I went to NC State, which one of their strengths is developing the technologies that help us manufacture semiconductors.
Mhm.
One of the top universities in the nation. And so we did all this work. I mean, one of the professors in our department was like the inventor of the JFET, which was an early transistor. And so we had this ability, and for some reason we let all that capability go to Taiwan,
Yeah.
primarily to one company that now produces like 90% of the world's chips.
And now look at what's happening with Nvidia. They want to bring it back to the US.
Yeah.
And you have these political nutcases who are saying, no, that's no, 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 no. Bring it back. Own it. Dominate it. American know-how, and I'm a Canadian people, and I'm not waving the U.S. flag. Don't get me wrong here, but North America, U.S. and Canada, I shouldn't say North America, U.S. and Canada has let go of the manufacturing process and let someone else own it and dominate it. It might take years until, if the investment is there, it might take years for it to come back, and you may have to train a lot of new people to do it. But if you don't, you're just going to be a net importer. And to your point about the trade deficit, that'll never go away. And that is that in that case, you're heading towards bankruptcy.
Right. Yeah.
And
It's
I
like
think
that's
that, and I think American growth, look, you're a powerful market of over 300 million people. I think you're 25% of the global economy. I get all that. But the world wants American goods. South America, Africa, Asia, Australia. They want America. Europe wants American goods. They want American know-how. Go out and get it. That's how you're going to get out of a trade deficit, not just by staying at home. Like you said, keep recycling the money in the United States. Eventually, you'll run out. Bring in foreign currency, bring in people buying your goods. You're going to see prosperity.
Yep. So for people that are listening, and maybe they bought into the whole idea of I probably can only sell domestically. For somebody that has something, what would be a good first step outside the United States or outside of Canada to target?
Depends on your industry. Every market's a little bit different, but my comment to them is not where should you go? It's where you should think of going. And look at markets that are emerging. Malaysia, Vietnam, South Korea, Mexico, believe it or not, parts of South America, they'll buy from you, but they're smaller markets to learn from. So you're not going to go, I know US is big, but you to handle another big market could be very disruptive to your business. So what I tell them is think small. Find that first market where there's very little competition for your goods, where you can actually sell it at a higher price point, make a better margin, and learn the export game. Once you do that for year two, three, go find another market and another market. And eventually you'll see over time, you're going to start adding two, three, four markets at a time. If you want to go in that scaling growth, I mean, not everybody wants to scale that fast, but you could, and you're going to see how well you're going to do. So I can't tell you today without, yes, this is the market to go to because that's the best. But depending on your industry, find a small market that you can manage. It's like going to another state. I don't want to say 51st state because you'll think I'm saying Canada. But I'm saying, like go find a country that's the size of one of the US states and learn how to deal with bills of lading, letters of credit, all these kinds of things that you've never dealt with internally. See how your operation works. Make sure it doesn't disrupt you that much. Make sure your leadership is aligned, your processes are well established, your marketing is well communicated. Once you do that, if you make a mistake, to your point before, if you make a mistake there, it's a minimal pain. You're not target. But if you do it right, the next move is going to be even more profitable than the first one.
Do any of your clients in the US take advantage of the Import Export Bank?
Not yet.
Not
Good.
yet.
No, yeah.
That was
There
in
are a lot of.
theory.
I want to tell you something. When you go and export, the U.S. government and some states have wonderful funding programs, by the way, and these programs open and close all the time. And if you can grab it, so like sometimes it'll be money towards trade shows, or money towards exporting, or money towards more operation and more labor in your company because you're doing more business. That is something. Sit with your accountant or your CFO. Let them find and dig because they're going to find those programs to help you more than I can. I always send that to the accounting department and say, go find us programs.
Yeah. Well, and my understanding of the Import Export Bank was it was set up specifically for small businesses to help them sell abroad. And I think it's primarily GE selling, getting money from the taxpayers so they can sell jet engines overseas.
Well, look, again, it's there are a lot of these things out there, and you have to apply, and you have to have but they all want a plan, by the way. And this is something I tell her, it's like you can't ask for money without a plan.
Yeah.
So this is what I bring, and this is not the sales pitch, people, but like this is what I do is I work with the company to find the market and to develop the go-to-market plan. Then you can go for the funding and watch it come in. It's way better when it's like when you started your business, you did a business plan. This is a business plan part two, a little lighter, well, actually a lot lighter, but then when you go and you bring it to whatever funding you're likely to get the money, and then you internally, your team understands what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. So that preparedness makes your new market entry much, much better.
So I have a question. It's going to seem out of the blue, but it actually has a purpose. I'm going
Sure.
somewhere. What's the birth rate in Canada?
Under two, if I remember correctly.
Slightly under two or significantly under two?
Couldn't tell you, but I
Yeah.
remember it was under two.
So and we are in the US. I don't know the exact number, but we're under two. And as bad as that is, we actually have an advantage because China, Japan, Russia, Europe, their birth rate is horrible.
Hmm.
Their birth rates are horrible. And so there's only so much time before China runs out of the laborers to do all the hand assembly. There's only so much time before these other countries are going to have trouble filling the factories with people. I mean, and just putting things in perspective, I was touring a factory in Japan in the late 90s. And you had that typical wall, the glass wall where you can look in to the factory and for the visitors. And I looked in there and there was a whole bunch of signs in Portuguese. I see all these Japanese walking around and the signs are in Portuguese. And I asked our guide, I was like, why are the signs in Portuguese? And they said, oh, those are ethnic Japanese that fled to Brazil, over 100 years ago. We need more workers. And, Japan has a little bit of a racial issue. So they, they, they were looking for Japanese, to keep the blood pure, to repatriate to Japan to fill their factories. They were doing that in the 90s.
And we see right now, I think Germany tried to solve its labor problem with a massive immigration program. Canada's tried to do it and whatever. Um, it's broken. Again, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but it's a broken system. We're not teaching our kids trades in schools. We're pushing them to go to, let's say, to university. And, I'm looking, my three kids graduated from university. Congratulations. And I know my oldest son's friends, they got their university degree and then went to trade school. If we started thinking like that, let's get them into trades earlier on. I mean, yeah, guess what? People will want to go into it, and it's sexy and exciting. We're not doing that anymore. So we're bringing in labor from overseas, and that system isn't necessarily functioning as well as it could. But Craig, the problem with what we're just talking about is it's everybody says that's tomorrow's problem. That's 20 years from now. What am I doing today? How can I fix my problem today? And the answer is, yeah, you're going to have to invest. You're going to have to invest.
Yeah.
And you know what? The net result could be extremely positive. But if you invest in people today and you invest in your machinery and you invest in growing, it's amazing the results. If it's, but don't do gut feeling and don't do it on a whim and don't be reactionary.
Yeah.
I tell people we're going to pick a market together, but we're going to have a pivot plan. In case market A craps out, we're going to go to market B. We always have a backup plan. So if you, again, plan, what is it? Those that fail to plan to fail.
Right.
This is what it is. You got to plan it and be strategic about it. I can't worry about what's going to be like in 20, 25 years from now. I don't have grandchildren yet, but I can't worry yet what my grandchildren are going to be doing when they're alive. That's on the politicians to figure it out. Like they got to make it more attractive, and the systems have got to be ready for tomorrow's generation to become wanting to work in factories, wanting
Yeah.
to work as manufacturing, get back to the trades. We've lost that. We've lost that in Canada. We've lost that in the U.S. We got to get back to it in order to so we don't lose our dominance in the world.
Yeah. David, we've proven we can chat for hours.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate what you do. And and we are North America. We need North America to do well. We need manufacturing here. And back to my little analogy of the small Texas town, if there's not money flowing into that town will die.
Yep.
And so I appreciate what you do in helping North American companies figure out how to ship outside of North America to bring some of that foreign money in.
Right.
How can people reach you?
So, Craig, I'm an easy guy to find. I'm on LinkedIn. Look up David I. Solomon. My link is David Solomon 13. I'm there. Info at serogrowth.com. SERO growth.com those are the two best ways to reach me right now. Or you can go to my website at serogrowth.com. All the ways to reach me, they're all there.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on Leaders and Legacies.
Thank you, Craig. Really appreciate it.